what a welcome. Good morning. Inspired women in Wexford. Firstly, I want to thank Sam for the invitation to coming to Wexford this morning. And it's my first time back on Irish soil in 14 years. So a lot of memories. And I have great memories of Wexford. And ironically, Sam, I was always in Wexford this time of year. Why? The Strawberry Festival. I love those strawberries. And the memories of staying with a girlfriend, Ethna, and her mother, every meal, at the end of the meal, there was strawberry cheesecake presented. And I can still taste it. I've never tasted anything like it since. It was fantastic. So I'm absolutely thrilled to be here. Yes, Samantha and I met on Twitter 2 years ago, and the power of Twitter. And did I think then that I would be standing here before you all this morning? No. So thank you to Sam. And also thank you to Sam for introducing me to Culzean Castle. When I woke up this morning, I thought I was back in Turkey. The green fields, the beautiful blue sky, and the fresh air, and water from the springs, which is exactly what it's like in where I live in the mountains in Turkey. I'm going to take you back now to how my story all began. And I hope to bring you on a little journey with me as to how I became a published writer. And if there's time at the end, if anyone wants to ask me any questions, only if there's time, I'll happily answer your questions. My very first unplanned, unpaid writing project was over 30 years ago. Now, maybe many of you weren't even born then. However, it was the Rosa Tralee Festival, and one of the editors of one of the broadsheet Irish papers was taking his team down to Kerry. And he said, Miriam, if you want to come with us, happily for you to come along. But the deal is, you have to write a little bit of editorial every day, and you have to interview some of the contestants every day. Well, what a task, what a challenge. But somehow I completed that project, and I was always interested in the written word, and I was always creative, but that kind of ignited a little bit more passion in the written word for me. He asked me at the end of that time, would I consider, with training, to come on board and become a journalist. But in my mind, in creative mind, and I always knew I was different, and I didn't think that you could put me in a little box. I wanted to go and fly like the butterflies, and I wanted to go off and do my own thing. So I packed a suitcase with a lot of hope, and I really thought, because I'd heard people say it, that the pavements, there was nearly gold dust on the pavements. But I learned very quickly that in moving to the UK, I had to graft and work hard and create my own career. And my career back then was in hospitality, setting up and running restaurants. But obviously, I started at the bottom and worked my way up. And I really forged a great career. And that was in the late 70s and early 80s. And Ruth earlier was talking about balance. Well, I jumped on the little hamster wheel, and I thought this was fantastic, and I'm really going to make a career out of this opportunity in London, say in the restaurant and food industry, and I was passionate about it. So a lot of my thoughts in terms of becoming a creative were pushed to the back burner. And I came back to Dublin maybe 6-7 years later, and still working. I partnered with two ladies, and we set up an Irish magazine. It was actually the first lifestyle magazine for men and women. And I did all kinds of writing on the magazine, and again my passion for writing started to come to the fore. And but of course I went back to London I got on that hamster wheel again. And as successful as my career was, there was still, the fun had gone out of my life, and the social aspect and the creative aspect, because I was passionate about theatre, reading, and even interior design. And I ended up moving from hospitality into health and fitness. And for 25 years, my passion as well as food was about exercise and well-being. And I was imparting all this great information to other people. But I didn't do it for myself. We don't always, do we? And it was getting that balance right. And nature catches up with you eventually. If you're running at 600 miles an hour and you're not actually taking any time out for yourself, with Ruth, beautiful, beautiful talk earlier. And in 1997, life for me changed forever, where I finally collapsed with a diagnosis of ME and fibromyalgia. And I became the plant in a pot. And if you can imagine that, I was looking out at the world, whereas I was always part of it, 600 miles an hour, buzz, buzz. And my husband's parents described me as the tornado, you know, and suddenly that was all taken away. And I would look out at the world, it walked around me, through me, and I was also in denial. And my gorgeous, gorgeous GP then would come to the house, and he said it was the worst case scenario he had ever diagnosed, because it was a very late diagnosis. And initially, the medical profession, and Ruth mentioned this earlier, literally thought the only way was the scientific way, with drugs. And at one point, I just threw all those drugs. At 6 years on, it wasn't working. I wasn't getting any better. I was getting very frustrated because I was still in denial. I threw all the drugs away, and I started to take control of myself. And I started to really analyze my diet, how I was eating, and only taking natural supplements. And everything was organic and as natural as it could be. And then, in 2001, superhero, as I call him, my husband, he appeared home with tickets, 2 tickets for the Southwest Turkey. And I had read that in Southwest Turkey, it had been proven for people with MS or ME. In a certain environment, it was proved to be hugely supportive and helped people manage their lives better. But when he came home with the tickets, I went into panic mode. Because for 6 years that we had been married, I had never been able to get on a plane, never mind pack a case. And suddenly, this panic and anxiety set in, and I could see this date looming. But somehow we managed to board the plane. And that holiday for 2 weeks was the first positive step in my recovery. And I knew, that glimmer at the end of the tunnel, I just knew then, if I can hold on to this and work with this, maybe I can start to manage my life a little bit better. Now, what I probably need to say here is that all through those initial first 6-7 years, my passion for writing suddenly appeared again. And I started to write poetry. Why? Well, the thoughts came very, very quickly. I'm always armed with a notebook and a pen. And I found that I was making notes, and within 48 hours or 3 days max, a poem would appear, complete. And it wasn't expending my energy. So when that first holiday in Turkey, I started to write again. And after that, I went back to Turkey on my own for up to 6 weeks at a time for the next 2 years to see how I would manage and how I would cope. Well, firstly, it's such a natural environment. Never mind the hospitality like Ireland. And and we'll talk about that later, but the Irish and the Turks, the connection, and back through history, that's for another time, but it's a lovely, lovely story. But the food is natural, organic, as I said. You know, the fish is in the sea in the morning, it's on my table at lunchtime. The vegetables, the fruit, there's no pesticides, there's no air pollution, any kind of pollution. But all of these things added to my curiosity about writing. And back in the UK, Chris and I made a decision in 2003, May 2003, that I would start to spend perhaps up to 5 months a year in Turkey and see how it went. And Chris came with me, and he changed his business as well. And initially, our first house was at the beach, by the sea, and I really thought this was my final sanctuary. This is where I really could turn my life around. And the first year, it was fantastic, but I hadn't quite let go. My mind was still doing as opposed to being. And a lot, and I don't want to give too much away because the whole backstory is in the book. I've gone right back to how the whole thing started and how I ended up in Turkey. But it just didn't work that first year. A lot of things happened and really, really quite stressful. And again, superhero, had met a friend, and he had introduced him to this village, 2,000 feet up a mountain, about half an hour from where we were living by the sea. Now, I never thought of myself as a mountain girl, with chickens and goats and, donkeys braying every morning, and I just never saw myself doing that. I always saw myself as being someone living by the sea. From the very first time we went to the mountains, the silence, as we had this morning at Killeen Castle, the silence, the peace, the tranquility, and I just knew it was a turning point. And that was my biggest light bulb moment. And I just knew things were going to change. And they did. Because I totally immersed myself again in the culture, in the language. I was already speaking the language. And the greatest thing of all, by just being amongst the villagers and the locals who didn't speak a word of English or Irish, they instilled in me how we can live so simply and naturally and still be effective. And we don't always have to have everything by the short and curlies in order to be productive or achieve. And that's when I started to write full time. And that's when I knew my passion was writing. And that's when I knew I had found my niche again. And Tales from Turkey was born. And of course then to find a publisher. Now for 20 years I was using the pen name Josie McGuirk because I was hiding and I had lost a lot of confidence. And I published my first book in my name, Josie McGuirk, in November 2013. And it was thereafter, Sam, that we met. I think Sam had a copy and she's read the book. But after publishing that book, my confidence returned, my self-esteem returned. I felt good in my skin again. I hadn't felt that for years and years and years. I'm talking probably about 17 years. So November 2013 was the first time I'd come out of the shadows. After that book, I knew I had to start writing as Miriam McGuirk. Because it's very, very different when you write in your own name. And I think as well, it was very important for me to connect, not just as a writer with my followers and fans at that point, but also as me, the person. Because sometimes writers, they are in the shadows, and you don't really get to know the real them. I think that's important, to get to know the real personality. But then, of course, in my wish to write as Miriam McGuirk, I needed to find a publisher. And it's very interesting how things happen when they're meant to, and when you're in the right place. I had started to write this series, Shattered Dreams and Scorpions at Midnight. And thanks to networking and Twitter, and superhero again, we were introduced to a publisher, and I was given one day a time slot of 35 to 40 minutes. And that turned into 2.5 hours. Thank goodness he was another Celt. So it was a good conversation. And I just knew as we shook hands and walked away, everything was going to change again. And I knew that door of inspiration was opening up again. And 7 months later, I've been in my cave, and last Thursday evening, in the UK, I published, for the first time in my voice, Shattered Dreams and Scorpions at Midnight. Because I found my sanctuary now. I have found my piece of paradise. And I'm really, really happy and proud of who I am. And I'm really proud of this book. And really, Twitter has helped, social media has helped, and the support I've had. And once you come out of the cave and complete it, as I have done, you know, as a writer, or completed your challenge, you're not one person. The I becomes we. It has to become we, because we all need, whether it's one other person, support, and we need people to understand us, to get us. And that's what I loved about my publishers. They're called Empower Publishing. Well, everyone who really knows me well called me M. And I often talk about empowering, whether I work at empowering myself, or I help to maybe empower or maybe influence a few people. So their name Empower, that was kind of ironic as well. And what I loved about them, they understood my backstory, where I had come from. They understood my Irish humour. And they also were willing to fly the flag of my subject matter, which was Tales from Turkey. And the stories are a weave and a thread from one to the other about this Irish woman living up a mountain, all these new experiences and adventures, which as a Western woman, I had friends who were saying, well, I'm sorry, there are no shops. Well, I didn't go there for the shops. And they said, but you can't wear heels. I didn't go there for the heels. And so my Western thinking had to just, and I had to tune into how it's done Eastern way. And who has helped me most? My gorgeous, she's like my baby sister now, is Selma, who's mentioned in the book many times. And they have just a great focus on life, and they don't get stressed. And one of the things that Selma would say to me, the word Hayat. Well, Hayat means life. And that whatever is happening in our lives, that life will still go on and still flow. And she describes life as like a river. It ripples along, it moves forward. And whatever obstacles, whatever pebbles, whatever stones, whatever boulders are in the way, that river or that stream will always find a way to keep moving forward. Just like we strong, inspired women will always find our way to achieve our goals, to turn our life around, to change if something's not working. And I really believe that no matter what and whatever challenges that each of us face every day, we can make a difference, we can achieve, and we can make it happen. And finally, in the book you'll see butterflies as they flit and they float and they flutter and they fly. And butterflies are a huge part of this journey. Now, Ruth was mentioned in a very vague way, age earlier. Well, I never talk politics, finance, or age. But I will say I am a vintage butterfly. And this vintage butterfly is going to continue to fly and flutter to Ireland, to the UK, and to Southwest Turkey, continuing to develop my passion in developing the craft of my writing. Thank you all so much.